This episode was made possible by ExpressVPN. Start browsing the web securely with 3 months free by going to expressvpn.com/MMI. On this episode of Meet My Inspiration, I talk with Josh Pelland. Josh is a former Royal Marine Commando, having served in Afghanistan, amongst many other places. He left the Royal Marines and spent some time working in maritime security all around the world. He then returned to his home in Western Canada and dedicated himself to a life of climbing and adventure. That was until 2016, when a fall, while climbing, left him paralyzed below the chest. Josh has been challenged and struggled through a lot, but he's never given up. He's a humble guy with an incredible story, and I'm very happy I had the chance to talk with him. And now, please welcome Josh Pelland. Hello everyone, I'm Chris Minion, and this is Meet My Inspiration. My guest today is Josh Pelland. Josh, thanks so much for joining me on Meet My Inspiration today.
Hey Chris, thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure, Josh, thank you. Let's begin with you sharing a quick overview of your background and what you're doing now.
Okay, so my background's been pretty diverse. I guess where my real adventure started was traveling to Kenya as a young lad at 16. That took me all over Kenya. A lot of adventures, traveled around on my own for a while, and came back to Canada. Was pretty lost, sort of thing, not really fitting in, needing a little bit more lust for adventure, I guess you could say. Got into rock climbing at that time, but ultimately I ended up in Britain, joining the Royal Marine Commandos. So pretty elite fighting force. Ended up sticking around there for 7 years. Worked in some pretty specialized units at that time. Came outside, left the military, and I went into the private security world. Worked all over Africa, Middle East, and a bit in Asia. Did that for a few years. Was living in South Africa at the time. I started really getting back into my roots of climbing, which I did on and off for a few years. And I kind of was getting a bit burnt out, stressed out, kind of comes with that line of work, and decided I'm done. I'm going back to Canada, where I originally came from, and started climbing full time. Ended up living in the back of a truck for a few years, climbing ice in the wintertime, traditional kind of mountaineering and rock climbing. And in 2016, I ended up having a pretty bad accident. I ended up falling 65 feet straight down, out for a day of rock climbing. I don't know what happened. I can't really remember. And ended up doing 8 months in a hospital. Ended up being paralyzed from the waist down. And that was a big life-changing event. And then pretty short after actually being injured, about 3 months, I got into hand cycling, which is a paracycling sport. And that's what I've pretty much been doing since then. So that was a really quick overview. And
well, there's a lot to unpack there, and we're going to get into most of that in more detail, of course, as we go along. Well, let's go back to your early life. So where did you grow up, and what kind of upbringing did you have?
Yeah, so I grew up all over Canada, really. My father was in the Canadian Forces at the time, in the Air Force. So that got us to moving all over the place, brother and sister. And really standard home, really loving parents. Also, I was allowed to be quite adventurous, which is what I needed. So I really got to thank my mom for allowing me to be letting me be like that, just let me be a lad and get amongst it and, get into trouble, get dirty,
So when you were a kid, Josh, who did you look up to? Who did you admire when you were a young kid?
So yeah, I spent a lot of time poring over, National Geographic magazines, climbers, explorers, ocean rowers, warriors, this sort of stuff. And I wasn't a big reader, but I did love reading about, guys getting stuck on the side of a mountain, guys getting in a battle in a jungle, all this sort of stuff. This is what really just got me down the path that I wanted to go down.
Can you remember one person in particular from those National Geographics that really stood out to you?
Not so much. I do remember like a cover of an old one, which looking back, and I think it was a guy on the face of K2 or whatever, and I was just, enthralled with that. I just love that, with his mask on and all this stuff, and I was just like, oh, I want to be there, type thing. But not one guy in particular or anyone in particular, no.
Yeah, I love that. The National Geographic. I read that as a kid as well, and that is a
Yeah,
very inspiring publication.
yeah,
That's fantastic. Now, you mentioned earlier that you did, in fact, join the military. You spent some time in Kenya traveling around as a youngster. You said you came back to Canada. You were a bit lost. Let's get into where
yeah,
you made the decision to join the military. What was your motivation for deciding to join the military?
yeah. Like I said, I kind of needed that. I needed that adventure. I needed that direction really, and that sense of purpose and a challenge. I needed a really big challenge. So I got all of that into joining the Royal Marines. Um, so what really drew me to them was the length of training, which is 8 months long. So it's the longest out of any NATO country. Um, and
And
sort of the end.
that's the basic
Sorry,
training. Well, that's the
that's
basic.
yeah, that's the basic training. Yeah. Um, so sort of the end product as well really drew me to them. Learning, well, training. Learning to live, fight, and survive in all different environments. And yeah, I just wanted to go on operations, test myself, see if I could do it, all that sort of stuff.
You
And
grew up, you grew up
sorry,
you grew up in a military family, I guess you could say. You said your dad was in the Air Force. Do you think
yeah,
that had some part in motivating you or inspiring you to want to join the military?
it did. Though the two are very, very different. And he did leave the military when I was, I don't know, maybe 10 or 11 sort of age. So, um, but yeah, that was a bit of motivation, sort of that family history, and both my grandfathers were in as well.
Mm.
So that kind of got me going there. And then also I don't know, I think I always kind of didn't really fit in as well. I wasn't going down the same path as everyone else around me, my peer group, sort of thing. And then, leaving Canada to go to the UK, that was the big adventure part as well, something completely new for me.
Well, you of course joined the Royal Marines, as you said, an elite fighting force. For people who may not be familiar with the Royal Marines, what sets them apart from other military branches? How would you describe the Royal Marines?
So that training, the length of training is very different. They're a specialist amphibious force with over 350 years of history behind them. So steep tradition, steep brotherhood, um, and all of that as well drew me to them. They've undergone a lot of changes throughout that time, um, adapting to different theaters of war and also operating in all theaters from the high Arctic, the jungle, the desert, on the ocean. And they also have a wide variety of capabilities within them. So that was that's pretty much them in a nutshell
Well
type
said.
thing.
Um, so for you, what was the process of joining the Royal Marines like?
Yeah, for me, I had to do all my application from Canada and then go across. And what they call it a potential Royal Marines course, where I had to come across, I had to do all my recruiting office and all of that in the UK. So that was a big chance, or taking a big chance. And then they also have a sort of like a 3-day testing and selection sort of thing to see if you like them and if they like you. And they just run you ragged for 3 days, and it's a pretty big shock to the system. And yeah, I got selected. They said, "Yeah, you're kind of someone we want." And then I had to come home, wait around for several months, waiting for some security clearance type thing, and then got my date to join.
So the 8 month initial training program, it's the longest, you said, for I guess any military branch of basic training. You know, for your average person who hasn't been through something like that, how would you describe that period of time, those 8 months?
Testing. It's very, very physical, very mental, but everything in it is a gradual build-up. You know, they're not just going to go, all right, put all this weight on your back and start marching off through the night. You know, no one's really going to be able to do that. Well, some people will have the physical capability, but they'll just get broken right away. So there's a gradual teaching, gradual fitness build-up, and everything just leads on to the next thing.
It's a very challenging, very testing environment. How do you think that it changed you as a person? You said that you were kind of lost when you initially decided to join the military. That is a very long period of time for a young man, 8 months. When you came out of that 8 month period, what do you think was changed about you?
I definitely had that sense of direction, that sense of purpose, that belonging, that brotherhood, the ability to take ownership and leadership, as well as, you know, being in a high trust, being able to work in a high trust group, being able to fit into that. And that was a big motivating factor.
Well, it sounds like it changed you quite a lot. So after you finished your basic training, what was your first deployment?
So my first sort of, like, I guess you could say, technical deployment, not overseas, was to Scotland, defending the UK's nuclear deterrent. And that was a unit that I was there for 2 years. So you're pretty much just on standby for protecting the UK's nuclear submarines and some of the other stuff that they have there at the different locations. And that was a really great place for me. I was surrounded by guys with a ton of experience. I also got to go on a lot of training trips to the States, to the jungle in Central America. So I really got to grow up, as it were, there, and learn from some amazing guys. They kind of pushed me forward into my career, gave me guys I could model myself after.
Was there one guy in particular that you can remember that stands out to you to this day during that maybe 2 year period in the UK and during your training period that really stood out?
Yeah.
Somebody that you really looked up to?
Yeah, there was a guy called Jordy. He was a corporal, so he had rank, a sniper, and he gave me he demonstrated what leadership was to me. You know, he was a guy that was approachable, very humble. And I remember I wanted to progress on into my career, and I knew one of the skills that I had to be strong at was map reading, and I was pretty horrible at it. You know, like I could be outside and I could look at my map in the hills and figure out where I was and where I needed to go, but all the sort of technical math side I was horrible at. And I just asked him, and he took the time to sit down with me over however long, I can't remember, and teach me, you know, just stop and teach me. And when I didn't get it, he would figure out a way to make it work. And man, that has always stuck with me. So yeah, Jordy, great guy. Really looked up to him.
It's a wonderful guy to have in your life. So you were there for 2 years, protecting the UK's nuclear subs and also going out on training missions and things like that. What was your first overseas deployment?
So overseas was like a few years later, where I moved on to a different unit. It's called Special Forces Support Group. It falls under the umbrella of the UK Special Forces, so it's separate from the Corps, but it's kind of hard to compare it to any other unit. Maybe our closest one would be in the States would be the 75th Ranger Regiment. In the UK, the UK Special Forces is SAS, SBS, Special Boat Service, Special Air Service. And we're, I guess you could say, below that in Tier 2 operation. And it was to Afghanistan. That was the tour that I did, was in Afghanistan. That was in 2010 in Helmand province. So if you look on a map of Afghanistan, it's south central, basically. Pretty busy place. Yeah.
That's one way to put it. That's some of the toughest fighting period during the conflict in Afghanistan went down in Helmand province. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, definitely.
So, Josh, when you arrived in Afghanistan, you must have known that it was going to be quite different from your previous experience. It was your first combat zone, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Was it a shock to you when you arrived there, or did you feel like you were well prepared and well trained for that kind of environment?
I was very well prepared. You know, the unit that I was working in, and all my previous experiences and the units before, brought me to that point of being prepared. I also had a lot of experience around me, guys that had been on multiple tours, very senior. I was young in amongst guys that were very senior, so that gave me an extreme amount of confidence. So I knew I was there getting on with my job.
Where did you spend the most time deployed? You were in the UK, you were in Afghanistan. I'm sure you went to other places as well. Where did you spend the most time deployed?
So UK pretty much. When I was at that unit as well, we did stuff in the UK. But war fighting would be Afghanistan. And that was just one. I only did one tour, and that was almost 7 months.
That's long enough, I think, right?
Yeah.
What were some other perhaps notable places that you were deployed to? So the UK, Afghanistan, some time in the US.
Yeah, time in the US. We did training in the Oman, and then also in Belize.
In Belize, so you kind of made your way around the world.
Yeah. They say, join the military, see the world, but you end up in all the rough places.
Yeah, not the places you want to go necessarily.
Yeah.
So when you were in Afghanistan, 7 months, a combat zone, no question. How would you describe to somebody who hasn't been in that kind of environment, for most people, for the most part, what's the lifestyle of living in a combat zone and knowing that you could be sent out at a moment's notice? There could be a firefight that pops up anytime. You're constantly preparing and to go out on missions. What is that lifestyle like?
Tiring.
Yeah.
Really tiring. It depends on what you're doing, where you are. You could, and I was pretty fortunate. I was able to do a whole variety of stuff within that operation. So some of it would be kind of long range patrolling, as it were, living out of vehicles for months at a time, fighting and patrolling in urban areas, doing kind of direct action raids. I also mentored, a small team of our Afghan counterparts. So, for instance, living out of vehicles for months at a time, you're just sleeping on the ground or on a small cot bed, not really showering, maybe just rinsing with water bottles, moving around at night and moving into an area throughout the night or whatever. Yeah. Depends. You might just be doing some sort of you might just be doing foot patrolling and trying not to step on IEDs, or just engaging the enemy or waiting to get engaged. I don't know. It changes so much.
Yeah.
And it can be really boring as well.
That's a good point.
Really boring.
A lot of time just doing nothing. It goes from really intense situations to completely boring situations that can go on for an extended period of time. That 7 month period of time being, in a combat zone, how did that affect you mentally? What I want to know is, did it feel like you were in a supportive environment amongst your fellow soldiers, or did it feel like you were kind of dealing with everything mentally, at least, on your own?
No, it was very supportive. You know, I could go into situations where I knew 100% that we were going to be getting into a gunfight, and that it was going to be a heavy gunfight, you know. Um, and I felt calm and calculated throughout all of that. Even leading up into it, you know, whether you're walking into the target area, you know, I felt just at ease type thing. And even after all of that is during, and even after all that is said and done, you know, if I needed it didn't happen, but if I needed to talk to someone, you know, I could put my hand up and go, hey, I did not like that, or this isn't sitting well with me, whatever. You
Did you
know,
actually do
maybe
that?
No, I didn't. You know, maybe it was just not part of that culture at the time. It definitely wasn't really. But I felt like if I needed to, I could do something like that.
That's kind of why I asked that question, because I think that, you know, there's obviously many well-known cases of people coming back from that environment and having PTSD and you know, struggling with everything that they were dealing with in that combat zone. And for most people not having been in a combat zone, I was just curious, do you guys talk amongst yourselves? Seems like probably most of them don't. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Definitely not at that time. Guys didn't talk about that stuff. But there was one other guy that actually had a pretty impactful impact on me, and it was before I actually went. He was a very senior guy in Iraq, Afghanistan, and he told me. I remember I was walking down a hallway where we were staying, the barracks or whatever you want to call it, and he just said, "Hey, Josh, when you're coming back, and if there's any issues, just feel free to come and talk to me." You know, and that was a big shock to me, you know, because it was at the time. It's much better now. At the time, that was not happening. So, you know, that's where that kind of comfort in the back of my head that I could reach out and chat to someone was.
That's nice that there was at least somebody like that gave you a little reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
And you say things are different now. How do you think they're different now?
Yeah, there's a big push to, probably in the last maybe 3-4 years, and it's probably due to the impact that PTSD, other issues, anxiety, depression, you know, have had on lads coming back from all these tours. There's been a big push for people to get out and speak up about these things, reach out for help, which is pretty awesome, you know?
Yeah.
Because it definitely makes, and within the military as well, not just for guys that are outside, you know, because it definitely makes people a lot stronger, you know, when they can deal with these issues and then continue on with their careers instead of just having issues and then you got to leave and left alone.
Yeah. Well, Josh, what was your total time in the military? Did you say 7 years earlier, I think?
Yeah, six years. Six years. I did.
So
6 years.
Why did you decide to leave?
I was just ready for the next thing, sort of thing. There was a couple things going on that I didn't like the way I had to kind of get back to the core, as it were. You know, I was separate from it, and I had to go back. I kind of wanted to stay where I was, and at the time, that wasn't an option. So I was like, all right, see, I'm done. I'm moving on. Next thing, type thing. So I left very satisfied with what I did. You know.
Yeah, sure. So how was your transition back to civilian life?
So my transition to civilian life was, well, I went into private security. It's basically like the military, but with freedom and money. So, you know, all the guys are similar backgrounds, a lot more relaxed though.
Well,
still being able.
sorry to interrupt you, Josh, but I do want to talk
Yeah,
about that. I know what you did following that.
yeah,
You entered into maritime security. How quickly did
yeah.
you enter into that after you left the military? What was the period of time
I
between?
I basically stepped out of the gate and then straight onto a job.
Oh, so there,
So
you pretty much did not really have to transition back to a normal civilian life, as it were.
no, where I did incur issues was when I left the private security world. You know, that's where I really came into the actual real world type thing.
Well,
Um,
let's maybe come back to that in a second then.
yeah,
So let's talk about your time after the military. You entered into maritime security. I
yeah,
think it was at a time when like Somali piracy was at its height. Could you
yeah,
describe that period of your life?
yeah. It was busy. A lot of going in and out of airports, traveling constantly. I was living in South Africa at the time in Durban on the east coast. Um, and what I was doing was I would either travel with the vessel from point A to point B or on its trading circuit, or I was doing other stuff like moving weapons and equipment around to various ports where they were stored in preparation for other teams, um, or I was training um, crews and giving briefs to officers, captains of vessels. So I might fly to Singapore and just be there for a day and prep the crew and vessel, and then go off somewhere else. So it was quite busy, um, quite boring, really. You know, I spent a lot of time on the bridge of big oil tankers, just chit chatting with whoever was running the ship, type thing. Got to go in and out of a lot of really dirty African ports, North Africa, East Africa. Um, yeah, probably went to about 30 different countries during that time, 30 plus maybe.
Wow.
So pretty busy.
And how long did you do that for?
I did it maybe for 3 years, 2 and a bit, 3 years, something like that.
Close
Yeah.
to 3 years. Did you ever encounter any dangerous situations? I mean, you said there was a lot of just kind of downtime, doing not much, maybe sitting in airports a
Yeah.
lot, but
Yeah. I was quite busy. Yeah, nothing really dangerous, because what we would do is we'd make the vessel basically like a floating fortress.
hmm,
So it was also a visual deterrent. So anybody that wanted to come on board, they would see, okay, there's just going to be too much of a hassle. We'll wait for an easier kind of target, as it were. We did have some skiffs try to approach and test the water, and nothing. I did hear though one night, and it was quite eerie to hear I think it was a Chinese vessel being attacked by multiple little skiffs, and they didn't have any security on board, and they were radioing for a coalition warship that was way too far to have any impact on them. So I don't know if they got taken or not, but I remember hearing that, and it was quite eerie, and it also made the crew very unsettled as we were headed in that direction.
and obviously you were in no position to do anything. Were you there on the ship by yourself, I'm assuming?
No, there was a couple other guys with
Oh,
me in the
okay.
team, the security team. But
But
yeah,
even,
we couldn't do
even still,
anything
just a few guys.
anyways.
And that wasn't
Yeah,
your mission.
no, yeah, that's it. It wasn't. We navigated away from it, but it was so far ahead of us anyway. If we were gonna, you know, interdict them or whatever, it'd be hours type thing.
Yeah. So the vessels that you were on and cooperating with, they were most likely just well prepared, well
Yeah,
stocked. And like you said, there was a visual deterrent as well. So you didn't have to encounter any of that stuff yourself. So that's actually
yeah,
quite.
no,
So
yeah,
after your time in maritime security, like I said, we'll come back to this point. You did in fact
yeah,
transition back to civilian life at that point, I guess, right? So I'd like to hear about
yeah,
that. So you spent, 7 years in the military, close to 3 years not really in the military, but not quite a normal civilian. So when you did leave the maritime security work, what was your life like at that point?
Yeah, pretty lost, you know. I came home and I really had no plan, no direction. A lot of the things that I did try just didn't seem to pan out, and I felt very lost, you know. Um, and I really didn't, you know, it was almost 10 years since I was living in Canada, and I really didn't know my country, my family, really, you know, everything seemed very foreign to me.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of that a lot of that trust that I had with these guys that I worked with for so long, um, that wasn't around. You know, I didn't have it anymore, um, and I felt very distant. A lot of that though was down to myself. Um, you know, not having a plan, as well as trying to just hold on to this past of mine. You know, kind of really letting it take a hold of me. I did want to climb, and I did climb, and that was what I really was passionate about. But it took a while to get settled into that rhythm and kind of find that joy again. Um, and that period of climbing was a very healing time for me. You know,
Well,
so
let's get into climbing then. You came back after your time in maritime security. You kind of were a bit lost, which it totally makes sense. I mean, you created a whole new life for yourself, and then you came back to this rather foreign environment. Um, so, what was it about climbing that appealed to you so much? What did you get out of climbing that made it such a fulfilling experience for you?
so yeah, the couple things was that trust that trust again was
Mm.
there between myself and a climbing partner. Um, the sense of adventure, the physical pursuit of it, as well as the physical pursuit and the technical pursuit, and um, also sort of the preparation, the logistical preparation, and all that kind of that militaristic kind of stuff really drew me to it. And sort of the climbing is quite a quite a personal, I don't know how to say it, like kind of an art form
Mm.
in a sense. I don't know, maybe spiritual in a kind of way,
Sure.
you know, almost like surfing or
Mm.
some of these sort of things, you know, where you have to be really on point with what you're doing, depending on what you're climbing. You know, when I'm on a huge ice climb that's like 600 meters high or whatever, you know, and you're just in this zone, just this beautiful zone. And I do relate some of those feelings of almost time standing still to combat, where you are very calm, very focused, not tunnel vision so much, but just everything is just, you see what's going, you know what's happening, you know, it's just you in that moment, you in that whatever climb. It's quite surreal in a
Absolutely.
sense.
It makes total sense that you'd want to chase that again and again and again. Well,
Mm-hmm.
when you at some point you kind of became addicted to climbing. I mean, you really threw yourself into it. Um, you said you were living out of the back of a truck. Um,
Yeah,
let's talk about that
yeah,
period of your life. How long do you think that period was? A couple years, maybe?
yeah, maybe yeah, two and a bit years sort of thing. Yeah,
So
so I was yeah,
so for again
go on,
somebody
sorry.
who hasn't lived that kind of lifestyle, which again is most people, how would you describe, sleeping in the back of a truck? I'm living a very humble, simple life, and combining that with a passion of yours, which is climbing, and experiencing such exhilarating things for a period of a couple years. What's that life like for you?
Uh, it's hard, it's pretty hard. I always had pretty big goals that I wanted to work my way to. So it was a lot of fun as well, meeting a lot of interesting people,
Yeah.
traveling to a lot of interesting places. And I was just able to just go like a dog, constantly getting after what I wanted to do. So it was a lot of fun.
So for you, what are some of your high points or your achievements in climbing?
Um, I think one of them would be being able to climb quite confidently at a variety of different disciplines.
Mhm.
So I was, very confident climbing ice, hard technical ice climbs, mixed climbing. So that's where you go between sections of rock and ice using your ice tools and crampons, so those spikes on the bottom of your boots. Doing that in alpine environment, so a bigger environment where you might have to cross crevasse fields, glacier field, whatever, to get to it, snow slopes. Crack climbing, I really loved that. That was sort of what I really loved. Big
Crack climbing.
long crack routes. So where you're wedging and twisting your fingertips or your hands or your whole body into a granite crack.
Is
Or
that
just
sorry? Is
sorry,
that
go on.
what's described as free solo climbing? Are you using ropes, or are you just
Yeah, free. They call it free climbing
free
actually.
climbing? Yeah, sorry.
Um, oh, sorry, no, free climbing, like putting in your own protection in the rock. So
Mhm.
you're using tapered nuts, tapered piece of alloy or whatever, brass maybe, into
Mhm.
the constriction in the rock, or a camming device that um, opens on itself when it gets weighted.
Mhm.
So there's no real set place to put these pieces of gear in, um, as opposed to like what they call like a sport route. So maybe a route you might see in a climbing gym where you clip the bolt sort of every several feet or whatever. This is all up to you. So if you don't put one in for 10 feet, you're falling 10 feet to that last piece and then 10 feet again. It's that sort of stuff. And I'd like to do that kind of climbing in winter as well, sort of with using the ice tools and the crampons and that sort of stuff.
I mentioned Free Solo, kind of
Yeah,
accidentally earlier. It's a film starring, not starring, but featuring Alex Honnold is his name, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
he did a free climb up the face of, you know better than I, in Yosemite.
Half dome,
Half Dome,
El
yeah.
Cap. Yeah,
Did you ever have any experience with something maybe similar to that? Maybe not to that level, but that kind of climbing?
yeah, yeah. So I did do some of that as well, um, both on rock and then um, mixed climbing. The rock and ice sort of stuff. Definitely not as high as that guy, but still high enough. If you fall, you're done. Um, and
Free climbing on ice.
yeah, so ice climbing. Yeah,
Ice climbing just without ropes and without, you still have your
yeah, yeah,
crampons and your ice axe and all those things, just no.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So ice climbing is just it's amazing. You can hear these huge pillars of ice. You can feel them move. You can hear them crack. You can see water flowing behind them. You can hear the water flowing behind them. It's just thunk. Just you can hear the
Exhilarating, right?
hollowness of it sometimes. Yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
And you're not, well, you might fall, but you get those guys in there, you're you're solid. If you
The
get a
ice
good
axe.
rhythm going, yeah, you get a good rhythm. So yeah, I did do some soloing. um I had done the routes many times before, so I was very comfortable, and they they were well below the grades of what I was, that was hard. It was quite easy for me, sort of thing. So you could feel like you could just get into this rhythm and this flow, and you don't have to stop and wait for your partner to come up. You can just move. And routes would be on for like a couple hours, just cruising. Just it's really nice. I don't know. It's like going for a long run or something.
Yeah. So
Sort of thing.
what's happening in your mind when you're climbing something like that? Is your mind kind of clear and open? Is it empty? Is it like a meditative state?
Yes, it's very meditative. Just a pure flow state. It's just you doing this physical output, and you still have to be on point though. You're still focused on what you're doing in extreme detail. When you're climbing with a rope or something, depending what you're doing, it's fine. You can fall. Even if you're going to take a big, huge fall, which they call in climbing, taking the whipper, that's fine. You're used to it. Where you can try many different times, many different moves to get around a certain crux of a problem. But in those moments of soloing, it's just this beautiful flow state.
Absolutely. Well, Josh, unfortunately, about 4 years ago, I think when you were about 31 years of age, you did indeed have a very traumatic and life-changing fall while climbing. Could you talk about the climb that led to that fall? What were you climbing?
Yeah, so I was in Squamish, British Columbia. That's just an hour north of Vancouver, and it's a big kind of granite crack climbing area. It's one of the biggest areas in Canada. It's a place I've been a few times, and I can't remember the actual climb I was on, but it was in a place called the Smoke Bluffs. It's just these bands of cliffs that go up into the hillsides. And I was going to this area. I was quite far back from the main road. And I was doing a style of climbing called rope soloing. And that's just where I manage all the rope work myself. So what I do is I build an anchor on the bottom, I have a mechanical device that feeds the rope through as I go up, and I put in the gear into the crack. And I was just going up and down, just going up and down this band of cliffs, just practicing this style of climbing. And I was alone for the morning, and then as the day kind of warmed up a little bit more, a few more climbers came, and don't really remember what happened at all, but I was what they call jumaring. This is all that I remember was I was jumaring, so using a mechanical ascending device to go up a fixed rope. And it just went black, completely black.
Well,
And
let me interrupt you for a moment, Josh, because what you're alluding to is that you keep saying you can't remember, and the reason you can't remember is you fell off the side of that cliff, 60 feet, 70 feet. How far was it?
Yeah, it was 65 feet. So months later, I ended up getting an email from one of the other climbers that was in the area then, who actually saw me fall. So she was at the top of her climb and just looking over at me, and I was hooked in at the anchor at the tops of the two bolts, and I was organizing all my ropes and gear. So that's how I know I was at the top of the climb. And in the guidebook, it says that it's 65 feet. And she just saw me falling straight back, straight down. So I landed on my shoulder, and the back of my head hit a boulder. And I was still conscious, trying to sit up and trying to help. But like I said, I don't remember. So I was airlifted to Vancouver, and I was revived twice in the helicopter.
Revived twice.
And I don't really, yeah. And I don't really remember too much from the first month in hospital, but it was what I do remember was people coming to visit me here and there, but probably the first 2 weeks was very intense, where my mind reverted back to probably the last bit of trauma that I had. And I thought I was back on operations in Afghanistan. And I thought that I had been actually captured and I was being tortured and I was trying to escape. And obviously I couldn't. I only had use of my arms at that time, being paralyzed, but not knowing. My eyes were covered at times, probably just passed out, but I was still able to hear all these sounds around me, the nurses, the doctors, going into operations, all this sort of stuff. And it just was not registering at all. And I actually had to be restrained a couple times because I was pulling out all these cords and cables, and just it was pretty brutal, you know.
What was the extent of your injuries?
So yeah, the extent of my injuries was I had bleeding on my brain, uh, lacerations all over my body, multiple fractures, rib fractures. I had an aortic dissection, so that's from the impact. There's layers of your aorta were torn into layers of my aorta were torn and detached. I had collapsed lungs, and they were filling with blood, so that had to be drained. Broken legs, and the main injury was a complete sever of the spinal cord at chest level. So spine was just shifted completely off. Yeah, so it's pretty brutal.
Pretty brutal. And you don't remember the first 2 months of the recovery period, except for a few things here and there.
Yeah, the first month I don't really remember at all.
I want to know, Josh, while you were in the hospital, maybe after that initial couple months, you did kind of get your wits about you to some degree. And it started to dawn on you the extent of your injuries, the severing of your spine, as you said. Obviously, that's a horrible trauma, especially for anybody, but for somebody who's an active person like you are. Was there anybody that, kind of in those early days, anybody who had had a similar experience, anybody who had a serious injury that came along and tried to show you, like, this is awful, this is horrible, but you still have life to live. Like, you can still have a fulfilled life despite this injury.
Yeah.
Was there anybody that came out and kind of showed you the light, if you will?
Yeah, there was quite a few people actually. So I ended up getting airlifted from Vancouver to Calgary, in Alberta, and I was there. And yeah, I had a couple athletes that came by, para-athletes, different levels of spinal injury, from really low in the waist and high quadriplegics, so broken necks. And a lot of them were just brutally honest with me, like, hey man, this is what's in store for you, you know. We do all this sports, whatever it was. So there's so much you can do. It's not over. Don't give up. You know, very very positive, but very honest with me, which I really appreciated. Like, hey, you know, you're gonna lose control of your bladder, or you know, it's gonna take a long time to figure this stuff out. So that was really I was really lucky to have that.
Josh, eventually you were healthy enough to leave the hospital. How long in total were you in the hospital? What was the total length of time?
So 8 months. 8 months I was in the hospital for. The last month I was in a local hospital in my town, and I was just getting the house ready, you know, getting a lift in, organizing, you know, making the house accessible for myself.
Yeah, that's
So
kind of what I'm going to ask you about is when you did initially leave the hospital, there were obviously physical challenges for you, things that you've most likely obviously adapted to at this point. But in the early days, like you're learning how to use your body in a new way. Psychologically, you're adapting, like you've been traumatized and you're trying to return to normal life. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced once you finally left the hospital, when it was, you know, you're going to live? You're going to live. You're not going to die from that fall. And now you have to
Yeah.
adjust to this new life. What were the challenges when you got out of the hospital?
Yeah, probably one of the biggest ones was maybe just getting up and getting going. I didn't, in hospital I had, okay, you've got physio now, you've got occupational therapy now, you've got to be here, so that kind of kept me a little bit busy. Um, so at home I was like, oh, what the heck do I do now? I could just lay in bed all day, but I knew that was just going to be a downward spiral. I knew where that could lead. And I didn't want to go. I did not want to go there. I even saw it in hospital with some of the other patients, and I did not want to go down that road. So I had to just tell myself, like, get up, get going. Let's get a shift on. Let's get a move on. And I was quite lucky. I started hand cycling while I was in hospital, so that gave me a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, a goal to keep me moving, to keep my mind going as well, while I kind of figured stuff out. But it was hard, I had to relearn everything. It was fine doing it in hospital, whether it's an occupational therapist there, X, Y, and Z, whoever helping you. And now I'm here, but I had my family around me, who are extremely supportive. So it kind of lighten that transition period, because it would have been a different story as well. So they just pick me up and go, okay, you're out, here you go. Man, I could see how people get lost, find it very
Absolutely.
difficult.
Well, you said you didn't want to go down that road. You said you didn't want to lay in bed all day because it was just a downward spiral. Did you have somebody that was kind of like, not literally, but sort of slapping you in the face and saying, get your shit together. Let's get on with life. You can't lay in bed all day. Was it one of those hand cyclers? Was it somebody in your family? Were you doing it to yourself internally? Where was that motivation coming from?
It was definitely, from myself within, like, let's get moving. Maybe at the time I didn't want to deal with anything that happened. I was just like, all right, this is what happened. Just forget whatever. Let's just move on. Definitely had that attitude. But also, the guys that I knew and still know and very much in touch with, it's kind of like an odd sense of loyalty to the guys in the military that I, like, and there were so many examples as well of guys that had lost limbs in Afghanistan and suffered horrific injuries, just moving on with their life, doing extraordinary things. And that was a huge motivating factor for myself, as well as all these other people that were now new in my life in the hand cycling and encouraging me and being a excellent example for me. So I was like, okay, I owe it to them, like I can do this, I'm not going to waste any time, type thing.
Let's talk a little bit about hand cycling. You said you started doing that when you were in the hospital. And I think now, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't you a professional hand cycler?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say professional. I am a development, I'm a development athlete with Cycling Canada. So I'm headed into that direction, as it were. Yeah.
So quickly describe what is hand cycling?
So it's a recumbent bike. So two wheels in the back and one in the front, with my legs on either side of the front wheel, pushing and pulling at the same time on the cranks. And it's the same gearing as a bike, except for it's just backwards and upside down. So I race and train in it. And we do road races, which are about between, say, 30 and 40 kilometers. That's where everybody's moving together to race, obviously. And then time trials. So just you against the clock. They're usually around 20 kilometers, and that can be with hills, turns, all sorts of stuff. So sort of the really fast guys, if you want to put it down to time, are probably moving maybe about 40 kilometers an hour on a really fast course, somewhere in and around there. So I'm definitely not that fast yet, but I'm getting there, type thing. The fastest that I've been on the bike on a downhill has been, like, recorded, was 97 kilometers an hour. I think I've gone faster. Just my bike computer wasn't working, and
That's quite fast. It sounds to me like hand cycling was, maybe not literally, but kind of a lifesaver for somebody like you. You suffered this horrific injury, and for a lot of people, they wouldn't have, or for somebody like you, I should say, you would need an outlet physically. You wanted to challenge yourself physically, through climbing or all the challenges that you had in the military. You're a very physical person. When you found this,
Mhm.
did you just latch onto it immediately?
Straight away, I got introduced to it 3 months post injury, and I started training with a coach twice a week. After my physiotherapy, I'd go and start training, and I was hooked. It's what I needed. I needed that. I needed that output. I need just that. Some people go to the gym when they feel down, hit the punching bag or whatever. Like, I needed this, and I needed a lot of it. So it filled that physical output that I needed. Um, it and then drive and goal setting and all that stuff. But it doesn't really kind of fulfill the mental stuff. Like when I was talking about kind of being in that flow state, that sort of side of it that I've had so much in my life, in the climbing, even in the security work to a certain extent, and definitely the war fighting. That's
Have you found anything that does come close to that, to be able to replace that?
No, not really, not really. I do some. I have done some pretty big endurance rides, and it's not really the same. Where there's so much, there's not really anything at stake, if that makes sense. But hey,
Mm.
I'm all right with that now.
Well, I want to
I
ask you a
think
question. It might
that,
seem kind of naive of me asking this, but I've
no, it's
seen
fine.
para athletes capable of doing just about anything. Is
Mhm.
there any possibility that you could return to climbing? I mean, obviously it would
Yeah,
be a different style of climbing, but
yeah, I have thought about it. There has been some guys that have done some pretty big climbs, like Al Cap, the big face that you referenced earlier.
mm,
But that was like the Jumaring I was talking about, just the ascending a rope, kind of doing a
yeah,
million pull-ups to get to the
yeah,
top of that thing. I have thought about a way to climb, like lead climb, so putting in that protection myself. But that would have to be under a huge roof crack. I've talked with a friend of mine that also got injured climbing, a pair, about doing some of that, but just I'm too busy.
too busy.
But too busy with the cycling. I might have to take a little break and do that at some point, but
Well, I'd be curious to
it's
hear.
it's
I'd be
always
curious to
in
hear about
it's
that at
always
some
in the
point.
back of my mind.
Of course it is.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was one of the greatest
yeah.
experiences of your life. Let's see, Josh. So, for somebody who has gone through a similar trauma similar to what you experienced, maybe it's not the exact same thing. Maybe it's like you said, a soldier who lost a limb or something like that. Somebody who's lying in their hospital bed, perhaps listening to this or watching this. What kind of advice would you give to somebody in that situation?
I would say just be honest with yourself. Be honest with what you're feeling, how you're feeling, and maybe start asking yourself what you need to do. And that can be really hard, especially when you're everything has changed, and it's just a roller coaster. But reach out and ask for some help. You know, uh, before you start that kind of downward spiral, as well as it's not over, and just find something, sink your teeth into it, whatever it is, sink your teeth into it, and it'll shift and change if you stick with it, type thing.
That's good advice. Good advice, Josh.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, it's been such a pleasure to hear your story, the highs and the lows. I think this is the kind of talk that can directly inspire others as well. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time and for joining me today on Meet My Inspiration.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, and thanks your audience for listening. Really appreciate it.
A huge thanks to Josh for taking the time to talk with me and for sharing his story in such an open and honest way. If you want to find out more about Josh and keep up on his activities, you can check out his website, joshuapelland.com. There you'll find his social media links, some cool photos of the many things he has done in life, and links to book him for speaking engagements. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Meet My Inspiration, and I hope we've been able to inspire you too, even if just a little. Sometimes that's all it takes to make great things happen. Using the internet without ExpressVPN is like broadcasting to the world everything you do online. Here's how to protect yourself and get 3 months for free. Did you know that your internet service provider knows every single website you visit? And what's worse is they can sell this information to ad companies and tech giants who will use your data to target you. ExpressVPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet so that your online activity can't be seen by anyone. ExpressVPN works on all devices, phones, laptops, even routers, so that everyone who shares your Wi-Fi is protected too. And the best part is using ExpressVPN is super easy. Just fire up the app, click one button, and you're protected. ExpressVPN is the world's #1 rated VPN by TechRadar, Wired, The Verge, and countless others. So if you believe your online activity is your business, secure yourself by visiting expressvpn.com/MMI, and you can get an extra 3 months for free. That's expressvpn.com/MMI.